Oh, I like to get meetings starting on time. This kind of gets to me.
I agree.
There he is. Okay, good. I'm going to call it to order. I see Dr. Farias is coming in. I want to go ahead and get started. Would you say I got started at 2 o'clock, Ms. Battles? Okay, all right. I want to welcome everyone to the July 25th, 2018 meeting of the Committee on Agency Operations and remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live via the internet. And I think, Council, maybe you should guide us through this, but we've got our chair, Stuart Stedman, here. And what does he need to do for us to establish a quorum at this committee meeting?
I stand ready to do whatever's necessary, Bill. You just tell me.
Mr. Stedman, I think what you should probably do is take your
Mr. Anwar's supposed to be here, but we don't know where he's.
Yeah, Mr. Anwar should be here soon. There he is. Well.
Problem solved.
Never mind.
You can do so at your pleasure if you wish, and if not, that's okay too.
Okay, well, let the, as they say, the record reflect that Mr. Anwar just arrived, so we have a quorum.
Sorry, 183 was just, I don't know what was accident or something.
Welcome, Mr. Anwar. We just started, and I just called the meeting to order, and we're just on item 2, which is consideration of the approval of the minutes from the April 25th, 2018 committee meeting. And I need a motion. Dr. Farias seconded. You've got to second it, Mr. Anwar. It's only 2 of you. All right. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is public testimony. We have not received any requests for public testimony. Is that correct, Ms. Battles? So we will move on to the next item. The first item under agency operations is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the agency's legislative appropriation request for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. Ms. Battles, Deputy Commissioner for Agency Operations and Communications / COO, will present this report. Ms. Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members. I'm going to be referring to 3 handouts that are at your places, and they look like this. The 2020-21 budget overview spreadsheet, and then you have a 1-pager on the draft exceptional item requests, and then you have this 11 by 17 page that has our 10% budget reduction scenarios.
Okay, give us a second to find these.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so, Mr. Anwar, yeah, you got them all there. This is number 1, and this is the second one that says draft on it. You got it underneath there, I think, no? Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see.
Is that it? And then 3 is this big one.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, let's go. Okay.
And I'm going to start with a couple of slides before I get to the handouts. I'm going to be talking about the guiding principles that we use to develop our legislative appropriations requests for the next biennium. And I'm going to try and keep it high level, but I'm happy to go into as much detail as you'd like based on your questions. I'm going to also talk about very briefly our baseline request for 2021, our exceptional item requests, and then our 10% budget reduction scenarios, which we are required to submit as part of our legislative appropriations request. So these are the 3 guiding principles that we use to develop our legislative appropriations request. You'll see that we prioritize programs that most effectively contribute to achieving the goals of 60 by 30 techs. We also prioritize funding to help us achieve our operational goals for our agency strategic plan. And finally, we adhered to the Commissioner's directive to evaluate all programs individually and to target those funding requests that will promote better results. Our total baseline funding request is $1.47 billion. The baseline request is the base level funding that was appropriated for the current biennium. Note that this amount does not include funding for Baylor College of Medicine, nor does it include the community colleges formula funding that is trusteed to the coordinating board and then distributed to the colleges through the 10-pay system. And this table here breaks down our baseline requests by method of finance. I quickly want to explain those. General revenue encompasses state tax revenues and fees which are considered available for general spending. General revenue dedicated are state revenues and fees that are set aside for a particular purpose. Federal funds are obviously funds from the federal government, and an example of that in our budget is a Carl D. Perkins program, which funds are used to support career and technical education. Other funds, which are funds such as earnings from the tobacco settlement, as well as private grant funds that the agency receives from foundations. And then the all funds encompass all of the methods of finance that I just described. So you'll see our baseline request for the next biennium is to $23.7 million less than our current biennial appropriations. That's really due to a federal grant program that is going away, teacher quality grants, a decrease in the tobacco funds, termination of grant funds for the TSEM scholarships, and so forth. So now if you turn to your spreadsheet that's titled Budget Overview, you will see here each goal, each budget strategy within each goal, and baseline funding for each strategy broken down by method of finance. Yes. You'll also see a column towards the right for our exceptional item requests, which I'll go over shortly. The one change to this document from the version that I emailed you on Friday has to do with the tuition equalization grant program, and that is strategy C.14. At the recommendation of the independent colleges and universities of Texas, we are recommending to propose to the legislature that the baseline funding for TEG be increased by $5.7 million, which would come from strategy C13, which is the Be on Time program for private institutions. You may recall that back in 2015, the Texas legislature phased out this program to serve renewal students only. And prior to each biennial budget, coordinating board staff estimate how many renewal students will be eligible for the loan under this program. So the amount of funds needed to serve renewal students next biennium is only $1.5 million at private institutions. And so by transferring the excess funds from Beyond Time to the TEG program, private universities can serve approximately 760 more students next biennium.
Is the transfer that you're talking about already on here?
Yes, it is. And so that's the difference between the spreadsheet I sent you on Friday
and what
to
we
this
have
one.
today.
So you'll
Okay.
see the tuition equalization grants has increased by $5.7 million in our baseline request.
So if you didn't transfer it, where would it go?
It would go to the Beyond Time, back to the reserve, the Treasury as lapse funds.
Oh, back to the state?
As lapse funds.
Okay, so basically, we're doing good with our 60 by 30 Texas
Yes.
plan by shifting it
It is
to,
very consistent with
Okay.
60 by 30 and affordability and so forth. On the next slide, you'll see our exceptional item requests, and these are desired general revenue funding above our baseline request. And the commissioner is recommending 14 exceptional items for a total of $177.6 million. And in presenting these requests, we wanted to differentiate the items that, if funded, will support agency operations versus those funds that would be appropriated to the coordinating board as trusteed funds to then support statewide programs, such as Texas grants. So approximately 2% of our total requests will go to support agency operations versus 98% that would go out of the agency to support statewide programs. So if you would like to pull out this handout, you will see a summary of our exceptional items. What you'll see first is our 4 exceptional item requests to support critical agency operations. And altogether, these would support a number of things. Under the $2.2 million for critical operations, it would support the creation of 10.5 new FTE to perform a number of responsibilities across the agency. Some examples of those responsibilities include undergraduate and graduate education program review for quality assurance, work related to the marketable skills goal of 60 by 30 techs, data analysis, IT security, web programming, contract and grant management, and fiscal analysis. And that's just a few of those responsibilities. But we would also use some of that $2.2 million to support and enhance our online accountability system, to also recruit and retain talented employees, and to support our board-directed external audit on our financial statements. So just to kind of give you an idea, just some context for this, I've been with the agency since 2000, and as far as I can recall, this has been the largest increase that we've requested to support our agency operations. And I think we have some very justified reasons for doing so this session. As my previous slide indicated, we have a $1.4 billion general revenue and general revenue dedicated baseline appropriation, which is really a significant amount of dollars to manage for a mid-size agency such as us. Since 2000, we look back and saw that our FTE count has decreased by the legislature from 310 FTE to about 265. And over that same time period, the legislature has given us increased statutory responsibilities, while general revenue to support our agency operations has decreased by $3.6 million. In the current biennium,
What's the 310?
that is our number of full-time employees.
And when was that? When did
That
we-
was in 2011,
Okay.
that it got reduced, and over that period up to today.
Today,
we have
it's gone down to
265.
265. And don't we have positions that are unfilled?
We do. We have a tough time.
And how does that play into this?
We have actual FTEs at about 238 on average on any given time, and we're authorized to employ 265. We don't have the budget to cover some of those vacancies. We also have a tough time, one, with turnover, as well as trying to fill the positions that we have, because we just can't offer the competitive salaries that institutions of higher ed can offer, that other state agencies can offer, or that the private sector can offer. So this is one of the reasons why we're asking for additional funding to help support us in that regard. So this is just a summary of our agency operations, and you'll see a $1 million request for IT application portfolio. It's a one-time cost, $270,000 for access of out-of-state student data, and then our compliance monitoring function. We want to double this the team that's working on this work, and I think you all could have witnessed the good work that Mark and his team have done over the years since FY14. So in the summary, you can see some of the more of the information that helps to justify this request. On the back side of this handout, you'll see the following exceptional items, which will go to support our statewide programs. And again, most of these requests directly support our 60 by 30 text goals and specifically help with affordability and completion. The legislature and the board have also highly prioritized graduate medical education, so you'll see an exceptional item to maintain the current 1.1 to 1 ratio of residency positions to medical school graduates. So I don't plan to go over the specifics of all of these since they're summarized in your handout, but I do want to talk a few minutes about the Texas Grant Program. Staff is proposing an increase of $107.3 million on top of the base level funding of $786 million to continue serving the current percentage of eligible students. Now the question is, what is the current percentage of students we are currently serving? At the conclusion of the 85th legislative session, Staff projected 92% of new students would be funded in the current biennium. Staff felt it was prudent to go back and verify just how accurate this estimate was. And it's also important to note that our projections have historically focused on students who qualify for the program and enroll in higher education at a public university or health-related institution within 16 months of high school graduation. This is what we call the high school pathway to Texas grants. When staff examined the data last week, they discovered that over 96% of students demonstrating eligibility through this pathway will be likely served this biennium. So while we were looking at 92%, it's actually 96%. However, this projection doesn't take into account the 3 other pathways to eligibility. So here you see the 4 pathways to initial eligibility. I just described the high school pathway, and you can see the 3 other pathways there. So introduction of these pathways have occurred at different times, with the TEOG transfer pathway being the most recent addition by the legislature in 2013. So due to the nature in which the statute phased in the TOG transfer pathway, data regarding this opportunity just recently became available. So when using these data, the agency completed a more detailed assessment of Texas grant projections based on high school pathway, associate's degree pathway, and TEOG transfer pathway. We currently don't have any data on the military pathway. So by adding the eligible populations under these 3 pathways, our initial 92% estimate gets reduced to an overall percentage of students funded in the program to 70%. So the $107.3 million we are requesting as an exceptional item will cover 100% renewal students, 70% of new eligible students, and will increase the target award amount of $5,000 by 2.5% each year of the biennium. So I'm going to move on. This is a list of our 14.
I had a
Yes,
quick
sir.
question. Can you, on number 10, the $2 million for the family practice residency program, can you really quickly give us a synopsis of how that program is doing?
Yes, well, as it indicates here, we would not be adding residency programs with this exceptional item. We would simply be increasing the amount per program from 6,200 to 7,600. We experienced 2 closures recently in Corpus Christi and Wichita Falls because they didn't have the funding to support these residency programs, and so they closed down shop. And we believe that part of that is that the 6,200 just does not provide sufficient support to keep these active. So this is why we're trying to focus that $2 million on increasing the amount per program. And I think I have staff here to, no? Okay. Is
No,
there any other
that's
question
good.
you need?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so when all these numbers are confusing, but anyway, so looking at the agency operations, you have the 14 million, the other funds is basically indirect sources, which is basically the CAL program, right? In other words, some, for the most part.
No, yeah, well, can you help me out, Ken? Because there's no general revenue, there's no, it's self-supporting, but it is in our appropriation.
Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Well, okay, so here's my big picture question. The legislature cares about the 14.089 because it's general revenue funds. They will also care about the 3.994, which is the exceptional item request. What about the 12.9? Where do those funds come from? And I guess the legislature, could they if they come from Cal, they can't, in other words, you're just basically supporting, it's not, it's the cost of administrating all that. Can they take it away?
No, not on the Cal. They could, if they desired. Currently, it's not, it's appropriated in rider and in the GAA as a line item, but it's not appropriated to a specific amount. So they would have to make a change to limit the amount that we utilize, but it would not be worthwhile because they cannot use that funding to balance their budget, so it would not provide that type of benefit of which they'd usually want to reduce. And they would not be able to use the funds for any other purpose because of the bond resolution, the covenants that we have for those funds.
Right. So basically, what they're going to be focused on is the 14 million versus the 4 million, or 3.994, the legislature.
Which specific item? I'm not sure the
Well,
number.
this is the total goal B, which is the agency operations. I'm looking at, okay, so to get, just a comment, which, I think it's important to ask for what you need, but that is, a percentage, a big percentage increase if you look at going from 14 to 3 to, well, whatever, another 4 million.
Right. And within that, just to note, so within Goal B, which is basically what we'll call either indirect or agency operations, it has funding for finance staff, general counsel, agency ops, as well as our IT and our facilities, so it pays for the building, et cetera. Currently, we fund that in the operating budget that you all approved in April. A portion of that, approximately half, I'll say, is funded through loan funds, and a portion is funded through general revenue. And in these particular initiatives, we're requesting specific general revenue because they do not relate to the loan program directly.
Right, I understand. I was just trying to get a sense, because the 14 number had stuck in my mind, and the 27 kind of surprised me, and then I look at just the indirect funds. Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
If I could just add one other thing too, you can stay there. I think the loan program provides this indirect funding to these things, but I think our concern is that as general revenue to support our operations, to achieve our core functions, as that goes down, our reliance on loan program goes up, loan program funding, and we don't want to do that. So that's why we're trying to get the legislature to support the operations of, essentially our core functions, why we were created in the first place, which is to do the undergraduate and graduate education reviews and approvals and all the other things that we do, not just, supporting the loan program, but all of
Yeah,
our
I
other
understand.
functions.
I mean,
So
otherwise
that's-
you'd have to raise the rates on the loan program, or you have to steer that, whatever the covenants of the, you have to get in that fairway, so.
Well, and what we, as Ms. Battle's saying, that what we're concerned about is we don't want to have an imbalance. I mean, really what you're trying to do is use loan funds to cover the support of indirect, or the portion of the agency that's helping support the loan program, such as IT and all the other areas that I've mentioned. There is some indirect support that's there, but there are other functions being performed, and we're asking the state basically to pay their fair share when
Right.
there's increases, other things that we're doing, et cetera, so that we don't continue to rely on loan funds and have this imbalance that maybe we're using more loan funds and the service really being provided to the loan program.
We've seen it as a great model for state government because state government isn't pitching in the general revenue to support 100% of our operations. We're actually able to, through the loan program, the efficient operations of the loan program, utilize this funding to support the state's needs. But we're getting to that point where we're just, the legislature's cutting us more and more in our general revenue administrative funding that we feel is going to potentially significantly impact our ability to perform our core functions and really compromise the quality of work that we do here. So on this slide, it just shows our priority the exceptional item requests in priority order. So of course, Texas grants is number one. And then the ones in bold, you can distinguish, those are the ones that would support our agency operations. And finally, moving on to the 10% budget reduction scenario, we have been required to submit recommendations for a 10% general revenue and general revenue dedicated reduction from our budget. This time, we were required to submit the proposed cuts in 4 2.5% increments. So that is this 11 by 17 spreadsheet that you have at your place. And very quickly, our total reduction for 10% is $135 million. And the point that we always have to make is that approximately 75% of our general revenue and general revenue dedicated funding is in our student financial aid programs. So while we would love to protect these programs, there's no way that we can make the target without suggesting a reduction in these programs. So on the spreadsheet, you'll see a column for the strategy number and strategy name, followed by a column with the GR and GRD baseline funding, followed by the 2.5%, the first 2.5% reduction, and then the second, third, and fourth. Then you'll see columns with the percentage reduced in each increment for each strategy. And then the total reduction if the legislature were to apply the full 10% cut. The last column on the spreadsheet shows you the prioritization of the cuts. So you'll see that Texas grants, for example, is number 23, which is the very last item that we would recommend cutting if necessary. So earlier I talked about how the legislature phased out the Beyond Time program, similar to the Beyond Time program. Similar to the Beyond Time program for private institutions, that program for public universities is overfunded by $12.9 million. So that's why you see that as number one on the list to go ahead and apply the reductions there, since this isn't committed funding to any students. We did list TEG for that amount that we recommended transferring in the base as the second item to reduce if the legislature had to go there. So again, we recommend that, since only contingent on whether or not the legislature does accept our recommendation to move it in the base. Otherwise, you wouldn't see TEG show up on this list until number 20 on the list. So very quickly, just to summarize, these are the, if the legislature were to apply the full 10% cuts, these are the programs, the lower priority programs that we have identified for 100% reduction. As a reminder, we use 60 by 30 text and our agency strategic plan to guide these recommendations, as well as the commissioner's directive. We also considered programs that are relatively new, presuming that recipients hadn't become dependent on funding, as well as programs that are not fully subscribed, such as the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program. That completes my presentation. I know it's a lot to absorb, and we were trying to keep it very high level, but again, happy to answer any specific questions you may have. Yes.
I'm looking at this larger spreadsheet, which is the 10% biennial base reduction options program.
Yes, sir.
And so would the ones that are appearing on that list be the ones that are in the column in green?
Yes, the 100%.
Okay. So am I reading this wrong? It looks like that, is it on there? I'm looking for tuition equalization grants.
That would not be a 100% cut. See, these are just those that would have a 100% reduction.
Well, Am I reading this wrong?
if the full 10% were to be applied.
It's hard to look across this
I'm
long
sorry.
line, but let me see.
So we've got TEG in two places here. The first
But it
one.
is 100% if I'm reading it right.
Yes, that is for the amount that we are recommending to transfer from the Beyond Time Private into TEG. Because of ICUT's request, they want that money to go into the TEG program as opposed to being sent back as lapsed funds to the state treasury. We agreed to that, and but if we're required to apply a
I
cut,
got you, okay.
then we would put that up on the priority list, since that would then leave them level funding from the current biennium. So it's not like they had promised this money to students yet.
What other questions or comments are there? I'll entertain a motion to approve the agency's legislative appropriation request for fiscal years 2020 and 2021.
So moved.
It's moved by Dr. Frias and seconded by Mr. Anwar. Any discussion?
Thank you.
When do we have to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Battles. The next item under agency operations is a report on grants and contracts, including those exceeding $1 million. This item does not require any action, and our general counsel, Mr. Franz, is available for questions. Help us find that sheet in here. Let's see if everybody wants.
There's none.
Oh, it says, is that right? Is it the one that says no?
That's right.
None? Is that what they're?
No contracts over.
Oh, there's an,
Oh, there is.
But it's,
hold up the one that we're looking at right now. This one right here.
less than $1 million, which we don't, yeah.
So this is, help us with this. This one right here is, this less than $1 million? Or what are we?
There were no contracts over $1 million.
And this is,
These are just all the contracts that the agency.
okay. Do y'all want a minute to look it over, or? Okay. Any questions or comments? Y'all want to move on? Mr. Anwar? Okay. The next item under agency operations is the final report on the key initiatives recommended by NTT Data regarding the agency's cybersecurity framework. This item does not require any action. Ms. Sun and Mr. House will present on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. We're going to present the fiscal year 2018 final report on the key initiatives recommended by NTT Data regarding our agency cybersecurity framework. So at the beginning of our presentation, I will take a couple of minutes to brief you on the assessment results conducted by NTT Data, and then talk about our overall strategy to mature our agency cybersecurity framework. Then my colleague, Mr. John House, Agency Information Security Officer, will brief the board on the progress made on the fiscal year 2017-18 security implementation roadmap since the last AOC meeting, and introduce the new implementation roadmap for fiscal year 2019. Between April and June 2017, NTT Data conducted an assessment of our agency's cyber infrastructure according to the Texas State Cybersecurity Framework. During a special called board meeting, NTT presented their findings and over 70 recommendations. In a nutshell, THECB scored higher than the state agency average in 34 out of the 40 control objectives. In 3 objectives, we received score equal to the state agency average, and there are 3 areas where we received score lower than the state agency average. During the assessment, NTT Data used the cybersecurity maturity level control to assess each one of the 40 controls implemented in our agency environment. The term maturity relates to the degree of formality and optimization of processes and procedures put into place. So a score of 2 indicates room for improvement in terms of standardization, documentation, and user training. A score of 3 means we have standard process and procedures implemented in our agency environment, and staff roles and responsibilities are well defined and documented. Since the assessment, Information Solutions and Services Division adopted the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, which uses business drivers to guide cybersecurity activities, and consider the cybersecurity as part of the agency overall risk management program. The customized framework aims to improve our agency cybersecurity maturity by taking its people, process, and technology into consideration. In June 2017, we released the first security initiative implementation roadmap, and it's our plan to release a new roadmap at the beginning of each fiscal year to continue our effort in maturing our agency cybersecurity framework. During the process, when we select projects to put on the roadmap, we take into consideration recommendations made by NTT Data. We also look at the maturity score of each control objective. At the same time, we work closely with the business team to understand our business priorities, assets, people, and risks, as they are always changing. And our goal is to introduce a relevant and actionable implementation roadmap to provide adequate support to our agency's mission.
So back in 2017, NTT Data gave us a roadmap of the assessment, and they gave us prioritized initiatives to take on. So this shows the initiatives that NTT gave us and our progress, and we're still wrapping up a few of these. And really, NTT's roadmap, these initiatives were to take us from level 2 to the level 3 maturity on these high priority items. So you see there's 3 that are still in the green here, and we're still wrapping those up, and we'll cover those in an additional slide here. Next slide. Progress, a quick overview of progress in Q3 since our last meeting. We purchased Qualys vulnerability management tools, and these vulnerability management tools, we purchased these through managed security services, and you'll see this MSS, managed security services. This is a way to efficiently acquire security services through the data center services contract. So Qualys is a good example, and Qualys is cloud-based, and Qualys is going to give us a way to evaluate security of our agency infrastructure and workstations and mature our security patch management program. Procedures, the NTT was real big on implementing procedures, and we've done a lot of work on documenting procedures, and most recently it's data loss prevention. We're using data loss prevention to prevent accidents with confidential data and files and things like that, and prevent them from leaving the agency in email and things like this. System development lifecycle, we have a security checklist for developers, and of course role-based training is really an ongoing process. And our most recent role-based training is data loss prevention. We're informing staff of our data loss prevention procedures and showing them how it works. Next slide. This slide really shows improvement, and you see the yellow column, and these are the 16 categories that control areas where we were rated at a 2 back in 2017. So we really believe that the effort we've put in over the years is going to take us to 3 when we finish up in August this year. And currently I'm working with internal audit on an implementation review of these initiatives and our progress on these initiatives. So this is really going to help us level set and make sure we are where we think we are, and make sure we've got a good plan going forward for 2019. This is an initiative still in progress. We're in Q4, and we're still working on a few things. We're still working on configuration hardening standards for some of our critical systems. And on this slide, you see the Managed Security Services, MSS. We've got 3 of these Managed Security Services projects that we're finishing up: Qualys Vulnerability Management, Web Application Firewall, and Security Incident and Event Management. And these are services that we will consume, and they will amplify our bandwidth. They'll give us more, like the Security Incident and Event Management, we'll ship them logs and they'll monitor them 24/7 and let us know if, something's going on that we need to look into. And the Qualys and Web Application Firewall will protect our agency websites from attacks and things like this. So this is the roadmap for 2019, and since we're finishing up the roadmap for 2018, we need to pick out what we're going to do next. And there are 70 recommendations that NTT Data made, and we've actually made progress on 30 of these. But we're going to look at what's left, and it's on this roadmap, and these are the things we're going to take on in 2019. And there's still some planning to be done on this roadmap, and we're tuning it. Like Jinjid said, we're going to consider inputs. Our inputs are NTT's recommendations, and we want to look at risk level and what's efficient and what's important for us to implement next. So these recommendations, they've been a challenge, and we've made a lot of progress. We're continuing to plan improvements. This program has really put us in a strong position to report diligent maturity levels to DIR, and we're going to be submitting the agency security plan in October this year. So with the work that we've done with NTT's assessment and recommendations and the work that's gone into this, we should be at more mature levels as we report our agency security plan this year. So this concludes the presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions on the assessment or the roadmap.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, I know a few years ago when I first got on the board, there were issues, but I would want to compliment you and your group, Ms. Sun and Mr. House, because over the years, the last 3 years, you've come a long way, and continuing, and it's an ongoing process, but it's an important one, so thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
And I want to echo that. Thank you for all your work on this. A question I have on these, the maturity scores, you talk about moving from a 2 to a 3, is that right?
Yes.
And you look at it, that slide, I guess it was number 4, are we trying to get to a 4 or 5, or tell me about what our big goal in all this?
With a 4.
And what would that mean to try to get it to those higher levels?
Well, 3 is considered due diligence, and when you get into 4, it's managed, and really.
What does that mean? It's managed.
Managed. It's measured, and you have ongoing metrics that prove at any point in time that you're doing what needs to be done. And really, to reach level 4, we need more automations, more dashboards, more things that are running and, proving our maturity levels on different processes at any given time. It's measurable, and that's a challenge, I think, for any state agency. We've got so many irons in the fire that, you really just can't be great at everything all the time. And, but, you know, I do think that we're at level 4 on things like vulnerability management and data loss prevention, because, you know, the things that we're doing in some of these areas.
Are we at level 5 in any area?
I would say level 5 is probably impossible for a state agency. You know, you've got a lot of people, you know, watching things all the time when you're at level 5, and I just don't see it as a tangible goal for us. You know, we need to focus.
But you were
on,
trying to, the big priority was to go from level 2 to 3 in so many of these areas, and then are you going to try to push to 4? But 5's out of reach, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I want to get things to 4. You know, that's the goal, is to try to have a lot of these 40 controls at 4. You know, where it's efficient and where we can manage it with the staff we have.
I also want to add that we're taking a risk-based approach, and also this is driven by the business priorities, because our goal is to have a cybersecurity framework that provides a strong and adequate support to the agency mission. So take the data classification control objective as one example. We're trying to get level 4 because data is one of the most important assets of our agency. So looking at all 40 controls, we are taking different approach depending on the environment and business needs of the agency.
Good point. Ms. Battles, are you satisfied with the progress?
I am satisfied, and but it also underscores the need for us to get general revenue to support an additional IT security FTE. Because right now we have John House and we have another security analyst who's more junior, but we want to get another IT security position in the middle of those two positions to really to strengthen our ability to get to that 3 and 4 ultimately. We also have, I mentioned the $1 million for the IT application portfolio modernization, that it would be a one-time cost that we could hire 2 senior consultants to come in the next biennium to really get us more efficient in terms of our application portfolio, but it would also help increase our security. It would also, we would start to realize savings in FY 2022 of about $138,000. So I think it's a really good investment by the state to help support us. Now, ultimately, if that funding doesn't come through, we can still do the modernization. It's just going to take us much longer to get there. So.
Did you have one too, Mr. Emmer?
Oh, go ahead. Is 5 is the best level you can go to, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
So my question, kind of related to that, is, so what businesses would have to operate at a level 5? Just describe, in other words, what's so critical. I mean, is it Google or is it
Well, I think
bank?
You know, you kind of get into nation state. You know, you get into that level where, you know, they have a lot of resources to throw at the problem. You know, nation state, 3-letter agency type security. You know, that's where you get into level 5, and there's wheels turning all the time to monitor everything.
Like the National Security Agency would be level
Yeah.
5. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Never be as good as the CIA.
Well, okay, CIA, maybe then.
All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you very much. Appreciate your help. So the next item under agency operations is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to proposed amendments to Chapter 1, Subchapter C, Sections 1.83 and 1.84 Board Rules concerning agency administration, standards of conduct. Bill France, General Counsel, will present this item to the committee. Mr. France.
Thank you, Mr. Steen. As you can see, these are really cleanup that should have been done earlier but they were just noted when we were in the process of changing the name of the foundation, and we were doing a rules review regarding the foundation and its relationship to the coordinating board at that time. So these are very minor adjustments to existing rules.
All right, do we have any questions or comments about this? I'll entertain a motion to approve the proposed amendments to the rules concerning agency administration standards of conduct.
So,
I was looking at him, so Mr. Okay, so Mr. Anwar moves, second by Dr. Frias. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Franz. The last item under agency operations is discussion of the governor's office new requirement to review all proposed rules proposed by state agencies prior to submission to the Texas Register. Ms. Battles and Mr. Franz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item was actually added to the agenda at the request of Chairman Stedman because we had informed the board leadership about a letter that we had received from the governor's chief of staff, Louis Sines, last month, directing all state agencies to submit any proposed rules to the governor's office for review prior to us submitting them to the Texas Register for public comment. Obviously, the governor's office is very concerned about agencies that are passing rules that impose either new costs on constituents and government growth and that sort of thing. So I think this is just an added review that the governor's office is wanting to take before we actually go forward with the rules. This doesn't necessarily impact you as a board, but you may be contacted about it. So, Mr. Chairman, wanted to make sure that we're aware of this. We did develop an internal process for all of our rules when staff bring them to Sharon. Sharon is the person who submits them to the Texas Register. 10 days prior to that, we submit them to the governor's office, to our policy analyst there, Matt Cope, and he'll review them and let us know if he has any concerns before we submit them to the Texas Register. We rarely submit any kind of rules that would impose a cost. We look back and we didn't see any within the last year. We did recently submit for our advisory committees, the creation of advisory committees, that could potentially impose a cost on the institutions because they pay for the travel of those advisory committees to participate, faculty or administrators to participate in those advisory committees, to travel to Austin. But other than that, we have not, to my recollection, passed any kind of rule that would impose significant costs on our stakeholders.
So I have a question. When we go through the process and we're submitting it to the governor's office, do we go ahead and disclose what costs might be associated with it? Is there a method? How would you do that?
Yes.
No.
So the governor's office provided a template for
Oh,
us.
so they're actually
And
good.
so they ask specific questions and they reference specific statutes of where this is coming from. And so we have to provide that analysis and whatever impact statements.
Were we doing that before?
Yes, to some extent with the Texas Register, we're required to submit estimated costs. And so I guess this is just another added level of review for the governor.
You just wanted to make sure that we discuss this?
Yes.
Do we have any questions or comments?
Yes. No action needed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly concerned. I just was, I don't have a sense of exactly what changes. If it's specific rules like the last one that Bill described, cleaning up, language, and then it's generally not that big a deal. But most of the stuff, like a change in Texas grant, allocation, I mean, that's a, do we just take Texas grants? I mean, when we look at the qualifications for eligibility and the different pathways, is that a coordinating board resolution, or is that a legislative
That's
determination?
a legislative statute. It's a statutory requirement.
Okay. So in the overall scope of things, the rules are fairly minimal from this agency.
Right.
Okay.
I can see other state agencies that would impose significant fees through their rulemaking.
Got it.
But we're just not one of them.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on. The first item under finance is consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the issuance of State of Texas college student loan bonds in one or more series and delegation of the authority for administration and approval of the activities necessary to complete the sale of the private activity bonds. Mr. Ken Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I have two individuals here in support, esteemed colleagues, Mr. Richard Donahue with McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton, and Mr. Lee Donner with Hilltop Securities. He's our financial advisor, and obviously Mr. Donahue from the Bond Council Legal. I'll provide a little bit of background for this resolution. We have the college loan program, specifically the College Access Loan Program. Our Hinson Hayeswood loan program has been in existence since 1965, with loans being issued in 1966. And the funding for these loans is originated through the issuance of bonds, and we take the proceeds of the bonds and we provide those to students directly through the institutions, through financial aid offices, and then from there the students can fund their college education, and upon graduation or soon after, repay the coordinating board for that loan, and the proceeds from those repayments go to pay off our debt, those bonds that we issued for those loans. So each year we do this. This is for funding for the following academic year, not this one coming up, but the following. And this resolution provides us authority to go through that process, and I'll have Mr. Donahue talk a little bit in detail about what the resolution does, et cetera, and then I'll have Mr. Donner talk more about market, how the coordinating board fits within the student loan area.
Thanks, Ken. For the record, I'm Richard Donahue, partner with the law firm of McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton. We serve as bond counsel to the coordinating board. The item before the board here is the bond resolution authorizing the issuance of up to $200 million of student loan bonds to make new student loans. This is the official action of the board with respect to the bonds. It does not actually contain the pricing terms of those bonds. That the actual pricing is delegated to either the commissioner or the CFO within certain parameters. This is the same process that the board has adopted previously. It allows the board to not have to schedule meetings around the timing of the bond sale. The board, as I said, the maximum par amount of the bonds is $200 million. Maximum maturity amount for the bonds is 40 years. These are the same parameters that we've used in prior resolutions. The security that the bonds carry, they're repaid by the loans, but they also carry the full faith and credit pledge of the state of Texas, so they're expected to garner a AAA rating like the prior bonds have. The resolution authorizes the bonds to be sold either a negotiated or competitive sale. We currently anticipate going forward with a competitive sale as has been done in prior transactions. I'm happy to go through the resolution in any more detail that you'd like, but that's the 10,000-foot overview of what the document is.
We like the 10,000-foot overview.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, sir. What do you have?
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Lee Donner. I'm a managing director with Hilltop Securities, formerly First Southwest Company. We're financial advisor to the coordinating board on its financing program for the student loan program. As Ken mentioned, you operate one of the oldest state agency student loan programs in the country. It goes clear back to shortly after the passage of the Higher Education Act in 1964. It's one of probably a dozen to 15 state agency student loan programs in the country. It is totally self-supporting program. Even though your debt is backed by the state's general obligation pledge, the state has never had to appropriate one dime to payment of any of the student loan bonds that you've issued since 1965. So every bond has been repaid by student loan program revenues. The GO pledge feature of your student loan debt is unique. There's no other state agency student loan program in the country that has the state's GO pledge behind that debt. That puts you in a unique position when we take your bonds to the market. Your bond counsel mentioned that the resolution authorizes the bonds to be issued by either negotiated or competitive bid process. You are the only student loan agency in the nation who has ever been able to successfully issue student loan debt on a competitive bid basis, and you've been doing it for years. The last time you had to resort to a negotiated underwriting was in, I believe, 2009, shortly after the onset of the financial crisis. You probably could have issued a competitive bid then, but out of caution decided to go with a negotiated underwriting. But you haven't done a negotiated underwriting since then. Your bonds are extremely well received, primarily because of the GO pledge, but also because of the very, very long history of a totally self-supporting program. I guess one of the final comments I'd make, although it doesn't directly impact the financing, is because of the age, the size, and the efficient operation of your program, you have in many years, probably the majority of the years over the last 20, offered the lowest or one of the lowest student loan interest rates of any state agency student loan program in the country. Be happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
So if we didn't have the AAA state rating, what would you think our rating, I mean, the guarantee, right, general obligation, what do you think our rating would be?
Without the GO pledge, the rating process for your bonds would be entirely different. They're treated right now as a GO obligation, obviously, and so you automatically pick up the state AAA or whatever the state's rating is. If you didn't have that, your bond issue would be treated as a revenue bond issue by the rating agency. It's an entirely different process. It's an entirely different set of criteria for rating the bonds. You would not come out AAA, not on a revenue bond issue, but you'd come out pretty close because of that history all the way back to 1965 with a fully self-supporting program that's never had any external support. So I would guess you'd come in at the AA plus level.
So I know we've talked about it before, but I need reminding. So the credit ratings that we establish for, in other words, we're going to loan to people with credit ratings, students or parents to guarantee, over a particular number, right? Who sets that? Is that this
The coordinating board does, and we came to you, notifying you and walking through a recent revision, I believe about a year ago. We raised it higher at 650. It used to be down to, I believe, around 570, which is considered subprime.
Right, and we raised
discussion.
it and then lowered the rate, or that allowed us to lower the rate.
And we eliminated the origination fee because we wanted to make it more easy for students to understand. We knew with financial literacy that sometimes there's issues understanding the difference between capitalized interest and an origination fee and how all that fits in and how much this loan is really costing me over the life of the loan. So we went to, which we've had in the past, simple interest on the loan. It is not capitalized, no origination fee, but we did raise because we were seeing over a 3-year period higher delinquency or default in the lower tier, which is standard. We did raise the credit rating. Now the credit rating here from AA, AAA, we do have 2 credit rating agencies, typically S&P and Fitch or Moody's, that we utilize, and they're national entities and very well known and respected, and they will provide credit ratings for the specific bond series that we're issuing. But since they are GO, it typically winds up being the same credit rating for the state.
Right. So the reason I ask, if you didn't have the credit of the state behind these bonds, are you confident that given our credit rating and the interest rate that we charge in this competitive bid process will well cover any potential delinquencies given that credit rating?
Short answer is yes. I'm going to expand this a little bit. If you didn't have the GO, the rating would be based on the underwriting criteria you require of your borrowers, your balance sheet, and the projected cash flows for each individual bond issue and the student loan assets made with the proceeds of that bond issue. Your underwriting criteria as it stands today, combined with your balance sheet and your delinquency and default history, is strong enough that if you lost the state GO somehow and had to go to a revenue bond rating process, I still believe you'd make the AA level.
Right. That's actually not my concern. My concern is, oops, we've got the numbers wrong, and state, by the way, could you send us over $100 million? That's my real concern. But you're saying, take the state out of it, it's priced, and the credit rating is where you're comfortable.
Correct. And you have sufficient balance sheet within your student loan program, net assets and excessive liabilities, that you have the flexibility to weather some economic downturn effects that cause a temporary rise in default rates. So yes.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
And we do, just for your edification, we do run through Hilltop Securities cash flow analysis. We also do some of our own here in-house of the overall portfolio. And so we do look at the overall portfolio, one from the standpoint that if we stopped issuing loans today and we issue out all our money and the loans that are in existence plus the bonds in existence, where do we end up? Hopefully end up in a positive cash flow situation, and we're more than set to be positive in those analysis, as well as ongoing concern, as I call it, analysis that says if we continue to issue debt, because we need to manage that as well. If you continue to issue debt and it's increasing, you could run short, right? And as we saw, we used to issue debt at about let's say $75 million, probably 10 plus years ago. Then we wound up being $100 million, and recently we're around $170 million. You could wind up having your debt exceed your immediate cash flow. Long term, you might be fine, but your immediate cash flow and wind up short in your scenario. Neither one of those analyses reflect that we would ever need money from the state, or better said, that this program is able to operate on a standalone basis.
Question. Those other 14 states that you mentioned, obviously you said that we'd be like a AA plus, but what about some of the lower states of the other 14 states in terms of, are there single A ratings?
Yes, there are. There's a very broad range from the single A level all the way up to where you stand. You're the only AAA student loan state agency issuer in the country, and it's because of your GO. Again, if you didn't have the GO, if it was a revenue bond, your program's strong enough, you'd probably be in the AA category. But there are state agency issuers that are single A because they're a pure revenue bond program. They're younger, they're weaker. So there are single A all the way up to your AAA.
Thank you.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the issuance of State of Texas college student loan bonds.
So moved.
Okay, Dr. Frias has moved, and the second by Dr. Anwar. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. And, Mr. Martin, so
Yes, sir.
we're going to bring this up tomorrow to the full board?
That is
with the
correct.
recommendation of this committee?
Correct.
All right, let's move on. The last item under finance is review. Are these gentlemen through? Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Are y'all going to be here tomorrow?
Yes, I will be.
All right.
I can be. It's up to Ken and the board.
We currently had bond counsel scheduled, and then just financial advisor for this particular meeting, in case there was any specific questions, but we had bond counsel for any legalities, plus we do need to go through signatures after the meeting, assuming it's approved.
Well, given his answers to my question, which are on the record, no, I don't think you need to be here. I think we're good shape.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
The last item under finance is review of the fiscal year-to-date 2018 financial report to the board. The item does not require any action. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This report I bring forward to you every quarter, and this is for the third quarter of fiscal year 2018. And there aren't really any notable items because of time, and we went through the LAR and the bond resolution. I want to keep it short. I don't have any specific items to point out. This is the first year of the biennium, so many programs that may have remaining funding do have UB authority, et cetera. I do not foresee right now what the numbers are showing any issues, but I'm happy to entertain any questions if you have on a specific item within this report.
Any questions? I think that's a good way to do it. It just if there was something that was important, you'd be letting us know about
Absolutely.
it. Right. If not, we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Martin. The first item under internal audit is a discussion of the audit of the agency-wide financial statements for fiscal year ended August 31, 2017 by KPMG LLP. This item does not require any action. Mr. David Harwood with KPMG will present this item to the committee. Welcome, Mr. Harwood.
Thank you for having me. I'm David Harwood. I'm an audit partner with KPMG. This is my second year as the audit partner, as Susan Warren had completed her rotation to timeout, so she'll be back for the next year. In front of you, you should have our presentation. We'll let me skip to just the relevant slides. I'll be brief, but please stop me as I go if there's any questions.
Now help us, what should we be looking at up here as we go?
You should have our KPMG presentation.
Would it be this?
That's it, yes. And it's starting with page 3, or slide 3,
All right.
of the audit results. So we completed the audit of the financial statements for the coordinating board for 2017. We issued our opinion, which was an unmodified, clean opinion. We actually issued that a couple days earlier than we did in the previous year, so that's good news. And there were no significant changes to our audit strategy or audit plan that we had presented with you. In audited financial statements, we just point out the significant accounting policies are described in those footnotes in note 1. And then on page 5, we always want to let you know of what we think are the significant audit areas. We spend a lot of time on understanding and auditing the estimates, mostly because that's where you could have judgment or management bias. So and the dollar amounts related to the allowance for the student loans is where we deem that, where we spend a lot of our audit work. And I'm happy to report we had no issues with those estimates. They all appeared reasonable compared to the previous years. Another significant area of every audit is what we call management override. That is just the risk of fraud, and how we test that is through our journal entry test work, and as well as other fraud procedures, and had no items to note there. On page 7, I do want to point out we did have one corrected audit misstatement. This was purely a timing issue. When we did some of our test work on expenses, they were valid expenses. The amounts were correct. They were just recorded in the wrong fiscal year. Management identified it, but passed on it. However, it was material enough to bring it to your attention because it related to the aggregate remaining fund, which we have a lower materiality for that specific fund. So management did correct it. So that's the status of that misstatement, as it was corrected in the audited financials. Slide 9 is where we would say we're required to communicate anything in writing to you that we deem to be a significant deficiency or material weakness. Because of that audit misstatement, anytime you have an audit misstatement that is material enough to report to you, there's usually a control finding, a recommendation. So that's just this. This is the same issue, it's just we recommended some tightening up of controls to record that going forward. And then slide 10 is what we always report to you, what we call verbal comments. These are not required per our auditing standards to be communicated to you. They don't merit your attention, but you have asked previously, can you present everything you find? These are what I would call very minor. They all relate to the IT systems and the IT controls, and the majority of them have been corrected as they were found. Examples would be password expiration requirements were not being enforced. There may be a Windows account that should have been removed as it wasn't being used, and then some other very minor things on slide 11 as well, as far as controls over user access, documentate. Basically, the control was operating, but some of the evidence wasn't being retained that management was monitoring the access of user controls within the systems. So none of these prevented us as the auditors from not being able to rely on the IT systems. And then slide 12 is just our required communications that we put in writing, and there's really no matters to report to you, no disagreements with management. They worked well with us. And then we communicate on slide 13 that we are independent of the coordinating board. And I will open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harward. Very good presentation. Any questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
The next item under internal audit is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2019. Mr. Mark Pale, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item. Mr. Pale.
Thank you, Mr. Steen. Each year, we develop a plan to present to you here at the July meeting to outline our engagements for the coming year. And this plan allocates our internal audit resources to the universe of activities, and we audit those areas that represent the greatest risk based on a number of risk factors, but a couple of the more significant ones are the dollar magnitude of the program, as well as the last time that we've audited the particular area. The plan was crafted based on the resources of 3 staff, plus myself for the internal audit function. Planned work includes major areas such as a portion of the formula funding process, contracting, a follow-up assessment of the information security risks that you just heard a presentation on by Ms. Sun and Mr. House. We also do follow-up of corrective action implementation for the issues that come before you, our recommendations. We provide 50 hours of assistance to KPMG on the external audit. And then we also support the State Auditor's Office through investigative activities that are often referred to us from that agency. We have one additional item that we handed out to you today that is at your places. The document looks like this. It's a spreadsheet, multicolored spreadsheet. We wanted to talk to you very briefly about this, this document. This gives you a perspective of what we have and have not covered in our universe of audit activities over the last 7 years. So it's just a visual representation of areas that either we cover, KPMG covers, the State Auditor's Office, or some other external entity, and then those areas that that we haven't got to, which is typically or is driven by the fact that that the risk would be considered lower. I'd like to introduce to you Ms. Apola Ahmed. She's a senior member of my staff, and she's going to give you just a quick walkthrough of our historic audit coverage based on that document.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, board members. The spreadsheet up on the screen and that was handed out to you shows a 7-year look back at areas that have and have not been audited either by internal audit or by some other auditor like KPMG or the State Auditor's Office, as Mark mentioned. You can call these an audit coverage map. You can see, for example, some areas that get coverage every year, like elements of information security, or such as the financial areas covered by KPMG in their external audit. Other areas you will see have had little or no coverage in recent times. And that concludes my part. So if you have any question, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed. Auditing standards require that you be kept informed of the decisions that you make as a board.
Oh, before you go on?
Sure.
So you've done this before, right? Just an overall question. There are a lot of blanks on here, I guess?
Yes.
Does that concern you?
It doesn't, because it really is a matter of perspective, particularly over time. And so if you had looked at this document from a few years ago when we had less resources, there were more open spaces. And so we've moved more towards what the benchmark says our organization should have for internal audit staffing. We're closer to that number now. And so you're starting to see more of these cells get filled up. And so the ones that are blank, yes, we would love to have the resources to be able to do a deep dive into all of these areas, but that's just a sort of a cost-benefit consideration. And so our resources are directed at these line items that have the most risk, and that's consistent with professional standards and other audit organizations.
Okay, so the bonds fiscal year 2017 is blank, but we just heard they audited, the bond portfolio, right? KPMG. And that's an external or other audit.
This would be really, I guess, a different perspective, and we do talk to KPMG about what they cover and what they don't cover, and perhaps that's something that I could visit further with David or this coming year Susan about their specific scope of coverage. My understanding is that there are other aspects of the bond program that haven't been audited. So the financial reporting aspect, you would be correct, but there are other aspects of that program, sort of the operational side of that has not been looked at to my knowledge. That's a good point.
But I mean, I guess I don't understand. I mean, bonds are, by nature financial. So if you get the finances, the reporting right and, the testing, have you not audited the bond portfolio?
KPMG will audit what we're reporting in the financial statement. So they will validate if it's $1.175 billion and the right series that we have at each amount that are remaining, because it's a liability, so it's on your balance sheet. They will validate those figures against what is outstanding, and we show them supporting documentation for that, et cetera. What they do not audit, that Mr. Pale is discussing, is they don't audit from the beginning of the process. Did we do a bond resolution? Do we have a debt management policy? Are we following all the statute requirements for these bonds, et cetera, et cetera? And we do have bond counsel that helps keep us compliant and financial advisor to keep us compliant. But from an actual audit, KPMG does not get into that level of detail, and nor has Mr. Pale's organization as well.
But you're pretty confident the money is there, as reflected on the financial statements?
I am absolutely confident the money is there as reflected. in the
No further
financial
questions.
statement.
That really concludes the presentation. You have the plan before you. We're seeking your approval. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. So the document that we discussed was just informational. The plan that's in your board packet is what we're seeking your approval for.
Help us find the plan right now.
It looks like it lists the projects and shows required audits, risk-based audits. Yeah.
Item 6B
In
Right.
in the booklet, okay. I was looking for it in the loose. Okay. So 6B, all right. All right, good.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a quick comment, just to touch
Yes.
back on our exceptional item request? If you recall, the 2.2 million for critical agency operations, we were requesting part of that funding to go towards our board-directed external audit. We budget about $175,000 a year to hire KPMG to perform that financial statement audit. And I think that this is what we're trying to get the legislature to support this, because even if we use that $175,000 to hire 2 more internal audit staff to do the work, we lose a lot of the expertise at KPMG and the manpower and the knowledge, particularly in information system controls. I think,
Yes,
would you agree with
absolutely.
that?
Yeah.
We sort of lose that experience and expertise by doing it internally as opposed to doing an external audit. So this is sort of the rationale behind trying to get the state to support that external audit, because right now we're using loan funds to support the cost. So again, it's in alignment with our operational goal to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and this gives you an added level of comfort knowing that we have this external audit done every year. So I think it's in the best interest of the state to support that.
Now, you know I'm a strong proponent of the external audit. Do I have a motion to approve the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2019? Okay, Dr. Frias, and seconded by Mr. Anwar. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, the last item under internal audit is an update on internal audit reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pale.
Thank you. We completed 2 internal audit projects since the April meeting, and both of those reports are in your packet. One of the projects closed out a complaint. I mentioned to you a moment ago that we often get complaints referred to us from SAO. This particular one involved an allegation of falsified financial aid information. And so we performed due diligence and we were unable to substantiate that complaint. And so we closed that particular project. The second project, the report is in your materials. It was our audit of formula funding. This particular report is a Category 2 report rating. As a reminder, we categorize our reports. Category 1 is no or only minor findings. 2 is findings, but if addressed timely, they don't pose a significant risk for the agency. And then 3 is those reports with findings where we're specifically directing the board's attention to those matters because of heightened risk of financial or reputational harm to the agency. So this is a Category 2 report. It included 5 recommendations in this formula funding review. It includes management response for the corrective action plans in this area. And I'll just say that most of the audit and the recommendations were focused on information security risks related to the huge volume of data that institutions of higher education report to the coordinating board, and for the formula funding process and how that data gets managed with our internal systems, the security controls and so forth over those areas. And so these recommendations are designed to strengthen those controls over that sensitive information. Unless you have any questions on those reports, one other note I'll just make for reference with the item that you just previously approved, the formula funding process itself is massive, and so we learned a lot more about that through this year's audit. Next year's audit plan actually will take another piece of that process related to the formula funding. It's called the 10-pay process, the dollars that are flowing to community colleges through the formula funding process. That audit next year will take a hard look at those controls. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on this update.
Yeah, so the vote that we took was to make a recommendation to the board, so we really haven't approved it, right?
Yes, you're correct. Sorry.
You mentioned SOA, the complaints, a lot of the complaints come in.
SAO, State Auditor's Office, sorry.
Thanks.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, good. Any other questions or comments? Then the first item under compliance monitoring is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the annual compliance monitoring plan for fiscal year 2019. Mr. Pale.
Our enabling legislation goes back to the 83rd regular session in 2013, and that called for the development of a risk-based compliance monitoring function and a compliance monitoring plan, and it even outlined the risk factors to be included in the development of that plan, such as, again, the dollar magnitude of a program and how long it's been since an institution's programs have been audited. The plan in your materials uses the resources of our 4 existing compliance monitoring staff to perform audits and desk reviews at our institutions around the state. And as you recall from earlier discussion on the LAR and Ms. Battles, the agency is seeking additional resources for the compliance monitoring function in the upcoming session. That's not reflected in this plan. It's an ask at this point. Our compliance monitoring work looks at 2 areas. It's divided between the accuracy of information that's reported to this agency, such as formula funding information, and then it looks at the administration of and the safeguarding of funds that this agency is responsible for in a trusteed role. Additionally, we do follow-up audits to ensure that our prior recommendations have been addressed by the institution. The plan before you that we're seeking approval for, or a recommendation for approval for the full board contains 16 risk-based formula funding reviews, as well as 8 reviews of trusteed funds. For example, Texas Grant would be one of those trusteed reviews. And then the follow-up work on corrective actions from items that have been brought before you in our previous reports. That concludes my discussion and presentation. Be happy to answer questions on the plan.
Any questions or comments?
I have a quick question on the determination of desk review versus on-site review. Do you make that determination, or is that, how's that done?
We do make that determination. It's judgmental. One of the things that we try to do, and it really relates back to staff retention ultimately, for the amount that we're able to pay our compliance specialists, we certainly don't want to keep them on the road constantly, and so there's a certain percentage of our work that we can do from here as a desk review, and then we have the ability to expand on that work if needed. So if we do a desk review and we see that there are bigger problems or issues that require more in-depth analysis, then we will actually expand and go out there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So moved.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The last item under compliance monitoring is an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pale?
Thank you. We have completed 9 projects since our last report to you at the April meeting, and you have each of those reports in your materials. It includes 3 formula funding related engagements and then 6 engagements that were over either financial aid or other grant programs. There was only one in your packet that had any recommendations. That was our review of formula funding at Del Mar College. There were some information security weaknesses at that institution and a couple of other recommendations. In the interest of time, be happy to answer any specific questions you have on those reports. I'd also just briefly mention to you that we're in the process of trying to fill a couple of positions, and so we're very close on one vacant position and already filled the other. So we are hoping to be fully staffed again by the beginning of the fiscal year, September 1st.
Question, if I may, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So I noticed that they're not just all universities or colleges. Obviously, we do GME residencies as well.
Yes.
I just noticed that.
That's correct. So any entity that we would have a trustee sort of relationship with where we're executing a contract or an agreement to provide funds based on certain compliance requirements, then that's within our scope of work. So the DHR is an example of that. Yes. Good point.
Thank you.
Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Thank you very much, Mr. Pale.
Thank you.
I think that concludes everything. We're supposed to conclude at 3:35, so we're close. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. Motion carries. The meeting's adjourned.